So picture two young children, and one is a boy and one is a girl. They are both playing with toys and, just living their little kid lives. Now, take a second and think about that image. What did the little girl have in her hand? What about the little boy? What colors were they wearing? For a majority of the population, a lot of people would say that the little girl was playing with a little doll. She was wearing a little pink dress, probably, and the little boy probably had some blue overalls, maybe a toy truck or a toy car. So gender norms have been a long established finding within our society and creates a pretty significant divide if you think about it. As someone who's experienced a lot of gender inequality since a young age, this is something that I feel strongly about. And like many of you, I believe that boys and girls should be treated the same, regardless of their preference, their beliefs, what they were taught to, what they were raised to believe. So today I'm going to talk to you about the pink tax. We'll talk a little bit about its history, how it kind of came about, its significant role in today's marketing, and then some things that we can do to make a change. So with that in mind, let's kind of take a look back into the history of the pink tax. So this can stem as far back as the earliest civilizations with the first group of humans. In her book, The Second Sex, Beauvoir explains that men often had the advantage of physical force, whereas women had the disadvantage of childbirth. And this is kind of where that divide starts. And so due to the unavailability of birth control, like pills, condoms, and the lack of knowledge and education, a lot of women spent a majority of their lives with child in their womb. And for some of these women, because of that, they were often bedridden for months at a time. This left them more vulnerable. They were often dependent on another person, most likely a male, to provide food, shelter, and protection. And then, men were often typically viewed with the warrior mindset. This is pretty similar to today's modern idea of masculinity. And this is, kind of where it starts. And so women have always kind of held a disadvantage compared to men. Miller and Borgita released an article in 2016. They kind of established that men and women exist in separate spheres. And, the separate existence of that is just due to the ideologies that we've conceived as people. Even as far back when America was first founded in 1776 and we first established ourselves as a democratic country, there was a lot of emphasis placed on educating boys and young men because they were going to be the ones to vote. They were, going to make the big decisions for our country, so they needed to be informed. But women were not allowed to vote, so why bother educating them, right? This was not a privilege that was open to women, similar to owning land. Owning land was a sign of power and wealth, and clearly back in these times, women are not allowed to have that. A study done by the the Institute for Women's Policy Research showed that even today, a lot of women are earning less money for the same jobs that their male counterparts are doing. So this is a long-standing precedent of inequality. With that, though, Rosemary Tongue, in her novel Feminist Thought, she explains that girls and boys are not born with these thoughts and these mindsets ingrained. Gender is a social construction. It means that the things that we perceive, all our ideas, come from our experience, from our environment. And so this is not necessarily a bad thing, because what this means is that all the ideologies we formed, we've done this before, which means we can do it again. We can deconstruct these ideologies and kind of go in the opposite direction. So with these gender roles in place in history, some of the gears behind the pink tax began to turn. One of the most prominent places that we see it is within the market, when they started with the commercialization of menstruation. Congressman Carolyn Maloney released a report in 2018 where she looked at a couple items and looked at some prices on the market, and she was able to kind of note a pattern that a lot of the products for women were more costly compared to the ones for men, even though a lot of times they had the same purpose, the same function. This doesn't apply to everything, but some of the ones that were most effective were often personal care and hygiene goods, so like skincare, makeup, soaps, perfume, things like that. She did explain that there were two possible reasons to this. One of them being tariffs. So a lot of times women's products are, have a higher tax when they're imported, and so companies would simply pass that fee on to the consumer. Another one was just the marketing difference. So, the cost of changing packaging to pink or changing the scent to something floral and girly. It costs money to do that, and so to break even, these manufacturers would just, again, pass that on to the consumer. And so in a 2016 NPR interview with a Wisconsin Democrat, Melissa Sargent, they discussed that a lot of women feel ashamed for having their period. So a lot of these period products, they're sold as normal goods, so they are taxed at a normal rate, even though having a period is not optional. We don't get to choose if we want to start puberty and, when we get to have our period every month, for the most part. And so, which begs the question, there is a counter argument that a lot of the birth controls, like oral contraceptives, medicated condoms, and even erectile dysfunction drugs, these are considered medical necessities, so they're not taxed. But sex is an optional event, so why are these products not taxed, whereas the unoptional period, these products are being taxed to us every day to millions of women. And so some people can describe that tax as a financial penalty on women for their biology. And so in a novel, The Body Project, Joan Brumberg explains that throughout the course of history, the topic of having periods and menstruation is becoming increasingly taboo. And as a result, a lot of parents are straying away from teaching their own kids about it, and they're just leaving it into the hands of these pad and tampon companies as well as the public school system. I mean, how many of you learned about this through school? I know I did. I didn't know anything about it until 5th grade. They kind of grouped all the girls together and grouped all the boys together and had a big talk. And when I talked to my parents, they really didn't want to have that conversation with me. It was the talk, and I'm sure that many of you feel the same way and may or may not have similar experiences. And so one of the main consequences of that is that there's a lot of room for misinformation and brainwashing, because these companies, the pad and tampon companies, they're the ones who get to tell us what we need, so to speak. And so this was kind of the start when they're kind of telling young girls, especially at that age where they're really easily influenced, there's a lot of room in their mind to kind of shape their ideas. And so that was one of the first things. And then, when the companies kind of realized that they could do this, they began to commercialize and market the entire female image. So this encompasses skin products, makeup, hair care, nail goods, things like that. They're kind of telling us, hey, you need to buy these things in order to be feminine because you're a girl and this is what you have to do, even though this is not the case. And so despite the history that we've kind of been through and some of the things that the marketplace is telling us, we do have room to make a change. We do have the power to make a change. And so, going back in history, all the women who existed centuries ago, they can't even begin to fathom some of the accomplishments that today's women have achieved. We have taken great strides throughout the years, and it is definitely impressive. And so, one of the best things that you can do for yourself is self-education. Instead of the time that you normally take to look through social media, Facebook, Twitter, you can take that time to just look at the news, educate yourself. It doesn't have to be just on women's, problems. It can be anything in politics. Make sure you're aware of the opposing views that exist, and, just kind of make yourself aware. And with that, a lot of people say knowledge is power. And, always make sure that the sources and everything you're reading are reliable. Don't just believe anything you say, of course. And so when you have knowledge, one of the doors that it will open for you is the door to the political realm. Joan McBride wrote a book called Women's Rights in the USA. And within this book, she did talk about women's roles in politics. And back in 2004, women's participation, mostly within Congress, was at 18%. Even though this is a fairly low number, this was one of the record highs. So this kind of shows that not a lot of women exist in politics, and the majority of the voice belongs to men. And so, you know, a couple things you can do without pushing yourself into office, because that's a pretty big achievement, you know, accomplishable, but it does take time. 3 things you can do: you can definitely vote to share your opinions, you can lobby, and, you know, participate in peaceful protests. And that way you can still, you know, voice your opinion, but not take strides that you may not feel comfortable taking, or, you know, if you don't feel that you're confident with that choice. And so there are a couple things that are in progress today. There is the Pink Act's Repeal Act that's in legislation, and so a lot of the political figures are working to kind of stop this price difference and make sure that men and women are being treated equally in the market. They're paying the same prices for the same goods. And so, you know, that's kind of a look into the future. So again, you know, today we just talked about the pink tax, the history, commercialization and marketing with that, and then look into the future. And, you know, I hope that I've educated you enough to kind of develop your own opinion and hopefully put your foot forward and make a change. And if there's anything you're going to take away from this talk, I know that it was a little bit rushed, but I do want you all to remember that you do have a voice. Despite what anyone has told you, despite what you've seen in history, you have a voice, and with that voice comes the power to make a change. Remember, we are the future. Thank you.